Welcome to At Least You Heard It Here, with your host, former federal prosecutor, Alyse Adamson. Take it away, Alyse.
Donald Trump, day one dictator or unitary executive? And hi, welcome to another episode of At Least You Heard It Here. I'm your host, Alyse Adamson, and this is the podcast where we put the topic of the day on trial. And today's topic is Donald Trump and his unprecedented use of his presidential powers. And here to help me break it all down is former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirschner. And aside from his years of government service at the Department of Justice, Glenn also is host of the wildly popular YouTube channel, Justice Matters. So if you have not already subscribed to that channel, which given its popularity, I'm sure you probably have, but if not, make sure you go ahead and check it out after you listen to this pod. And with that, welcome, Glenn. Thank you so much for joining.
Always glad to be with my former federal prosecutor colleague from the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. So it's great to be with you, Alyse.
Yeah, it's always nice to chat with people from what I like to call the good old days, right? Especially
the before times, yeah.
The before times, before everything that's happening at the department happened. It's nice to have people who remembered what it was like when our only mission was to do justice, right?
Yeah, we got used to that. And now the Department of Justice is determined to do the exact opposite. And we have to find ways to survive it, keep the rule of law alive as best we can until it comes back into the light. And hopefully it will come back into the light.
I hope so too. But, kind of what's happening at DOJ is kind of why I wanted you on the podcast today, Glenn, because, for those who don't really understand the big picture of what's going on, and quite frankly, most of us don't, right? I mean, Donald Trump gets sworn in January 20th, and immediately he starts issuing all of these executive orders and, pretty much says, I am the chief executive and I am able to do whatever I want. I've been democratically elected and I can make all decisions that pertain to the executive branch. And in our, what we were just talking about, that obviously encompasses the Department of Justice. And you may recall after Trump won the election, I had lots of conversations. You were one of the people I talked to. And I started to check myself. And I said, maybe there's another side to the story. He's called himself a day one dictator, but, maybe there is some kind of foundational principle for this, what we see as a power grab. And I started looking into this theory, this unitary executive theory. And it seems to me that Donald Trump and company are operating under this unitary executive theory. So I'm wondering if you could just explain a little bit about what that is and whether or not there is merit to the theory and what he's doing, or if it is just what it kind of appears to be on its face, which is an unprecedented power grab.
Yeah, so the unitary executive theory has two components as far as I see it. One, that the president of the United States is all powerful. He is, in essence, a king, a dictator. He can, for example, fire everyone in the executive branch for absolutely no reason at all. That's kind of one aspect of it. Now, we're going to talk about how that's not really the state of the law, because the Supreme Court, albeit in 1935, said, no. Congress can put certain checks, restrictions, and limitations on the president's ability to, for example, fire all federal executive branch officials at will. But the other piece, I think, to the unitary executive theory goes back to the old Richard Nixon claim that if the president does it, it's not illegal. And I think that is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of it, because the president is the chief law enforcement officer. So in theory, he can direct the DOJ to prosecute or decline to prosecute anybody he damn well pleases. Traditionally, there has been a separation between the president, the White House, and the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, and the federal prosecutors, because nobody believed, I shouldn't say nobody, most of us did not believe a president should be able to sit up on high, know nothing about the evidence supporting a decision to prosecute or decline to prosecute somebody, and just command that these are my enemies, I want them prosecuted. Interestingly, there's really no constitutional provision prohibiting that. It's just been
Really?
a custom, a standard, a norm. But let's talk about the constitutional provision that prevents, at least in part, the unitary executive theory, the all-powerful king of the United States. There's a case back in 1935 called Humphrey's Executor. And that case, boiled down to its essence, stands for the proposition that Congress is permitted by our constitutional construct to enact laws that put some limitations on the President of the United States. For example, who he can fire and how he can fire them. Let me use one that's in the news all the time. Inspectors General. They are the internal watchdogs in government, right? They're supposed to catch fraud, waste, abuse, crime, and corruption inside basically the executive branch. And Congress has enacted laws giving them certain protections. Why? Well, because if they're investigating crime inside corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse inside the executive branch, you kind of don't want the president to be able to say, this person, this inspector general, is about to expose the fraud, waste, and abuse in my executive branch agencies. I don't like that. You're fired. The Supreme Court said no. Congress can say, for example, a president can only fire an inspector general for cause. Got to be some wrongdoing. Got to be a reason, a legitimate reason, not a pretext to fire an inspector general. A president can only fire an inspector general after giving Congress 30 days advance notice. So the unitary executive theory does not pass constitutional muster, at least in accordance with the 1935 precedent of the Supreme Court. But Alyse, we both know precedent can always be revisited. So what Donald Trump is doing, and this is why Donald Trump is behaving like a mob boss, and Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, is acting like his consigliere, his dirty lawyer, as every good mob boss has. And I don't say that lightly or flippantly. Donald Trump is sitting in the Oval Office, acting unlawfully and unconstitutionally day after day after day, signing executive orders that even judges appointed by President Ronald Reagan, Judge John Coffenauer, say things like, this executive order is blatantly unconstitutional. Where were the lawyers in the room when Donald Trump signed it? They were right by his side, because the unconstitutionality is the point. Why is Donald Trump signing unconstitutional executive order one after another? Let me drop an important statistic here. There was
Please.
just an analysis done, reported out by Democracy Docket, done by a Stanford political science professor. Last month, Donald Trump's DOJ lost rulings in the many cases that are being litigated 96% of the time. 96. This is Republican appointed judges. This is Democrat appointed judges. But the unconstitutionality is the point, because what he hopes to do is get at least some of these cases bubbled all the way up to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court can do what? Revisit the precedent of Humphrey's executives saying it's passé, it no longer is our view of the Constitution, might say guys like, Sammy the Bull Alito and Clarence Thomas and others. And we're doing away with it. We are reversing it. And now we're going with the unitary executive theory that Donald Trump has been champing at the bit for. I fear that. Let me just, and I know I don't want to go too far astray, but I always like to, after we talk about the Trump-induced darkness, I like to talk about at least one point of light.
Do we have points of light?
We do. They're faint, and you have to kind of squint and close one eye and turn your head like this to see it. But it's there.
A little bit. Okay.
It's there.
Okay.
The last 3 due process cases And Donald Trump has been trying to do away with due process for any number of people, immigrants most notably, but the Supreme Court has consistently ruled immigrants enjoy due process rights. In fact, the Constitution says people, persons.
I was going to say that's because of the plain language in the Constitution, and I think that's an important point to remind people that that is not an interpretation. We've been talking about how the Constitution has been interpreted. That's what the case law precedent you're talking about, but here we're talking about the actual words that our founding fathers saw fit to put in the Constitution, right?
No person shall be deprived, right, without
Right.
due process of law, of life, liberty, or property. So even the Gorsuches and the Thomases can't seem to find their way around that. However, the last three due process cases to reach the Supreme Court, the ruling was 9-0, unanimous in favor of due process, 7-2, and 7-2, all in favor of due process, but Alito and Thomas are separating themselves a little bit from that due process protection guaranteed to all persons by the Constitution. But I'll take 7-2 all day long, right? So we have now a hat trick of good decisions on the constitutional front, at least with respect to due process. That's a point of light. It doesn't really pierce the Trump-induced darkness, but it's important to remember that all is not lost. Humphrey's executor, I don't know. I'm not a betting man. Alyse, $1 is my betting limit. I am not a high roller. I don't think I'd put 50 cents on the Supreme Court sticking with Humphrey's executives and shooting down the unitary executive theory.
Well, I mean, that's kind of horrifying. So can you just briefly explain what the consequences of a reversal of Humphreys would be?
So, you know how many lawsuits are presently being litigated regarding Donald Trump, abuses, lawlessness, and unconstitutionality? People he has wrongfully terminated. Let's use that. He's wrongfully terminated tens, if not hundreds of thousands of federal government employees, public servants. And he lied about the reason for the termination in many instances, saying things like, this is performance based. No, it's not. No, it's not. And it's obviously not. Those federal government employees presently, given the state of the law and Humphrey's executor, have some due process rights of their own. They have some labor law protections, the MSPB, right, the Merit Systems Protection Board. There are mechanisms that need to be followed if you are to try to terminate a federal government employee. Donald Trump ignored it all and lawlessly terminated tons and tons, thousands, tens of thousands of employees. And those cases are being fought in court. But guess what? If we lose the Humphreys executor battle, Donald Trump will be so, do you curse on your podcast? Will be so flippin'. I'm going to go with flippin'. I'm going to be good. He will be so flippin' unconstrained.
Yeah.
He will be able to do whatever he damn well pleases. He will be able to fire people for pure revenge and retribution reasons. He will be able to violate every law he wants because, a la Richard Nixon, when the president does it, it's not illegal if you're the unitary executive. And we are now, I think, firmly in Putin's Russia or Kim Jong-un's North Korea if Humphrey's executor falls. And I hope to hell it doesn't.
Well, let me give you a talking point from the other side, because what I attempt to do is at least, challenge some of these thoughts. So we could have a discussion, we could have discourse. I think what some who are in favor of this unitary executive might say is that, well, if it is reversed by the Supreme Court, well, at that point, then that becomes the law. So now he's no longer operating lawlessly. It's within the newly interpreted confines of the law. And he became president because he was democratically elected. So isn't this what the people want? Didn't America essentially want a king? And if America wanted a dictator and a king, then what's the problem? Isn't that the democratic process at work? Because that's what you see. That's the new talking point, Glenn. It's that this is the result of a democratic process, and that this, what we're seeing Trump do is what he said he would do on the campaign trail. Ergo, he is just implementing the priorities and policies and, quite frankly, wishes of the American people. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and if the American people voted that all minorities should not have equal rights, if you're not a rich white Christian male, you're a second-class citizen. Well, they voted for it. They voted for that. I don't buy the argument that the American people voted for lawlessness, dictatorship, and unconstitutionality. And I would support that position by saying, did Donald Trump run on I will unlawfully terminate tens or hundreds of thousands of public servants without cause? In fact, I'll lie about it and say it's because they're poor performers when they're not. No, you know what he campaigned on? I will end the Russian-Ukraine war in one day.
He did.
What the American people vote. I will bring down the cost of eggs. That's what the American. I will protect Social Security, and I really want to focus on that one because I know we're going to talk about pardons.
Yes.
And what he actually did was pardon a Social Security thief. So that what the American people voted for, and I think this is reflected in his approval numbers, is not what he has delivered. I think it's a specious argument, I'm not accusing you of it, to say whatever Donald Trump does is what the American people voted for. You know, I don't buy it.
Remember what the talking points were with respect to the deportations? It was that they were just going to deport the bad ones, and the bad ones were being defined as criminals, people let out from asylums. Remember all that hyperbole? Now, I didn't believe it at the time. Did you believe it at the time?
No.
Why else? If you read Project 2025, they actually outlined exactly what they were going to do. They were going to take resources from some parts of the federal government and put them all on immigration. We have, beefing up ICE, moving prosecutors from environmental sections into immigration sections to speed up mass deportations. So
yeah, we're actually
with
converting the civil rights section into the civil violations section. I mean, this whole thing is, I don't know if it's Orwellian or Kafkaesque or some combination. I know it's ugly. I know it's dangerous. And I know we have to fight every single day in every way we can to make sure the rule of law is not terminated by Trump and company.
No, I agree. And I'm going to ask you to come back so we can talk more about all of the changes, especially within the Department of Justice, because they're unbelievable. And there's some reporting on it. We hear the most outrageous, but there's a lot of things going on that are not, I guess, in our news cycle, newsworthy, but are nonetheless equally as dangerous. But let's go ahead and shift our topic to pardons. We mentioned it a few times here because Donald Trump seems to be on a pardoning spree. And that is separate from the unitary executive theory, right? I mean, that's what is so scary to me. We're seeing him pardon all types of criminals, and it's squarely within his presidential powers, right? I mean, we saw Larry Hoover, a former drug distribution lord, which was very interesting to me because isn't Donald Trump one of the reasons he wants to shut down the border to stop all this fentanyl and these dangerous criminals? Yet we're pardoning Larry Hoover, the Chrisleys, $30 million fraud, but because they're TV stars, somehow they deserve an unconditional pardon. I mean, what do you think about what is going on?
Yeah,
other than
there's a
insanity?
sheriff who was selling deputy spots and deputy badges and using his office to criminally profit. So what I like to do is, because there are so many pardons, and let me just say, there feels like there's this dangerous synergy between the unitary executive theory and presidential immunity, right? The unitary executive theory says you can basically do anything you want as president. The presidential immunity ruling from the Supreme Court says, and no matter what you do, you can't be prosecuted for it, provided that it's a core constitutional function or it's within the scope of the official duties of the president, then there's a rebuttable presumption that you can't be prosecuted for it. Talk about a dangerous, toxic brew of abuse of power and overreach. But here's what, mainstream media drives me to distraction. And because there are so many corrupt pardons, I use that word advisedly, I don't think the constitutional pardon power contemplates that a president can sell pardons for $1 million a pop and put that $1 million in his pocket. That's bribery.
You're
Plain
talking
and
about
simple.
Mar-a-Lago. Can you explain? Because I
I'm
know what you're
talking about
talking
Mar-a-Lago,
about.
and this is the one I want to focus on because mainstream media doesn't focus on it, doesn't drive it home in a way that it needs to be driven home. So here's what I like to do. I like to talk exclusively about the Paul Walzac pardon. Who the hell is Paul Walzac? He was a healthcare industry type down in South Florida, where all the good healthcare fraud seems to happen. He and his mother, who will become a player in this in a minute, her name is Elizabeth Betsy Fago. They were running this healthcare business. So what Paul Walzac was doing was he was withholding from his employees, nurses, administrators, doctors, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid money, as employers will do, take it out of their check. Where's that money supposed to go? To the federal government. He was pocketing it to the tune of $10 million. Guess who investigated that case expertly and thoroughly? The blue. Who are the blue? The police, law enforcement, agencies of all stripe are the blue. I don't care if you're the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, Capitol Police, Park Police, you're the blue. If you're the criminal investigators for the IRS, you're the blue. So we've got a guy who's stealing Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid money. We've got the blue expertly investigating it and building a case that was so strong that Paul Walzac had to plead guilty. And he did plead guilty. And your viewers may know, Alyse, but I don't know that everybody knows. When you plead guilty, you go into court. You are sworn. You raise your right hand. You're placed under oath under the penalties of perjury. You must swear to the judge that you're guilty. Not that it's a witch hunt, not that, DOJ has been weaponized against me. No, I am guilty and I'm swearing it under oath, right? That's what Paul Walzac did. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison and he was ordered to pay $4.4 million in restitution. Some of the money he stole essentially from us, the taxpayers, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid money. And then Paul Walzac's mommy, Betsy Fago, went to a $1 million a plate fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, paid Donald Trump $1 million to attend that fundraiser, and thereafter, Donald Trump pardoned a Social Security thief. Within, I think, a couple of weeks of his reporting date to the Federal Bureau of Prisons to begin serving his 18-month sentence, Donald Trump fully pardoned him, and the pardon killed, negated the $4.4 million restitution order that was designed to claw back the money he stole from us, the American people, the taxpayers. What does that one pardon prove? Donald Trump was endlessly saying on the campaign trail, I'll protect Social Security. No, you just pardoned the Social Security thief, and you even forgave the money he was supposed to repay us that he stole from us. So one, protect Social Security. Two, I back the blue. The blue put this damn investigation together so airtight and compelling that Paul had to go into court and plead guilty. You don't back the blue. You crap all over the blue. That law enforcement does every day. Three, I'm going to get after the fraud. We found the fraud. It's Paul. You pardoned Paul. How any thinking person, left, right, center, I don't care your politics, how any thinking person can ever listen to Donald Trump saying, I protect Social Security, I back the blue, and I give a damn about fraud, and believe it? And this is the message, Alyse, that mainstream media should be drilling into the heads of the American people, because it's true, it's accurate, it's important. It puts a few things together. You've got to assemble that puzzle a little bit for the viewers, but they don't do it. Instead, you know what they do? I swear, I try not even to turn on cable news anymore, because I turned on cable news the other day and I see an hour of the Donald Trump Elon Musk show in the Oval Office, where mainstream media is spewing their lies at us, unchecked, uninterrupted. Why are you doing this to the American people? Is it any wonder people are duped into voting for Donald Trump?
Well, one point I want to add, another pardon example of how President Trump does not back the blue would be the 1,500 pardons of the Jan 6 rioters, many of whom beat law enforcement officers on January 6th. That got a little airtime, but not enough. I think we should be talking about that every single day, quite frankly.
He doesn't back the blue. He backs those who beat the blue.
Beat the
Period.
blue. Beat the blue. Yes. And, again, you and I were both federal prosecutors. We backed the blue. And I don't understand how he can reconcile his position with pardoning people who engaged in violent assaults against police officers. I don't understand how he could pardon anyone for Jan 6, but especially knowing what his law and order messaging platform was during his campaign, completely opposite and disingenuous. So I just wanted to make that point too, because this whole concept of backing the blue, it was just a talking point, and he's made it very clear that he does not support law enforcement in any way, shape, or form, unless they're ICE agents. But why do you think, Glenn, because you spent a long time on cable news as an analyst, a wonderful analyst, by the way, but why do you think mainstream media is not covering these types of stories? They're not doing the deep dives. They're not piecing it together, because isn't that their job? Especially these investigative reports. Isn't that what they're supposed to be doing? Why do you think they're shying away from that narrative and instead airing, to your point, entire hour-long coverage of an Elon Trump Oval Office fest?
I think in part it is laziness. I heard somebody use the phrase, the news has basically become stenographers of current events. All they do is sit there and write
Wow.
about or talk about what's happening. That's not journalism. It's not responsible journalism. So I think part of it is laziness and this compulsion to be the first one to get this information. Donald Trump posted something crazy. We got to get it on air first. Yeah, but it's full of lies and defamation and dangerous rhetoric that will inspire people to violence against innocent folk. Oh, we got to get it on. That's irresponsible journalism. I think part of it is the financial incentive, right? We always hear about selling soap powder. And I think at its core, corporate media, legacy media, mainstream media is a business, and they're trying to earn a profit. And, they know that Donald Trump drives eyeballs to TV screens, to phones, and to computers, laptops. So they can't resist the urge to exploit that. I was a journalism major undergrad. I revere the practice of journalism and the study of journalism. And I was mentored by a lion of journalism, a gentleman named Clark Mollenhoff, who just 30 seconds was an investigative reporter for the Des Moines Register, multiple Pulitzer Prize winner, a fairly conservative gentleman, I think politically, took me under his wing, taught me everything he knew about journalism. He actually became a special counsel to Richard Nixon until Richard Nixon went rogue during Watergate. And then you can go to old newsreels of White House press conferences, and there's Clark Mollenhoff, whose nickname in the day was the Boomer, because he had this booming voice when he asked the president questions. And there are these iconic photos that he's just tearing Richard Nixon's head off, because to him it was never about politics. It was always about ethics and honor in office. So that's who I learned journalism from. So I hung in there with mainstream media as long as I could because I felt a responsibility to try, in part, to combat the disinformation, the propaganda, the lies from Trump and company about what was going on in these legal cases on the legal front. And I hung in there as long as I could. But now I'm 100% independent all the time and enjoying it much more, to be honest.
Well, that's good. And people need it. I love your channel. We already talked about Justice Matters, but just another reminder after you finish viewing or listening to go over and check out Glenn's content. Because Glenn, the thing I appreciate about you is that you do connect those dots, right? You do explain more than just the headline and help us understand why what's going on is so dangerous. Because what we have on one side, and this is my opinion, I always tell my listeners, I'll tell you when it veers into my opinion, but we have talking points and then we have facts, right? And the law. And I just wish that we had more of an appetite for substance over clicks.
Yeah.
So more folks are going independent. I think it is definitely becoming its own information source. And I just hope people find the right independent channels to follow.
Yeah.
Because
I would urge people to, for example, go over to Substack, because there are guys like Jim Acosta, who was with CNN forever, who left CNN. He's 100% independent. He does the Jim Acosta show all day, every day. And you want the straight scoop, unvarnished, go follow Jim. You can follow me on Substack. Follow Jim. I mean, this is where this is the present, not just the future, independent journalism. So I hope if you're not over there, you will go over there as well, because it's exploding right now with independent journalists doing what you're doing on your podcast, doing what I'm doing on my YouTube channel every day. So, that's where I think we need to be at the moment.
I totally agree. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for joining me. I mean, you've taught me things during this discussion, and you are insightful as always and incredibly helpful in breaking all of this down as we're trying to kind of figure out what are talking points and what is truth. And we seem to be in a post-truth society, which is quite scary. But I appreciate you taking the time to join us, and I do hope that you find the time to come back.
Thanks. Great being with you, Alyse.